Suddenly my boyfriend won't come inside and he won't tell me why. One day Parker was visiting for dinner and suddenly just refused to come in even though he'd been in my house a billion times. He stammered out an excuse that we should go eat at his place instead. At his apartment he acted completely normal. But when I told him I needed to go back to mine so I could quickly grab my work clothes, he actually said he'd buy me new ones. He wasn't upset or anxious either. He just absolutely refused to go inside my house. The next day he texted that he was outside, but when I stepped out he'd parked 3 houses down. When I asked why he didn't pull into the driveway, he said he preferred to park on the street now. I started trying anything to get him to visit. I downloaded his favorite movie. I asked him to help me move furniture, but he just hired movers instead and refused to step inside. Once, it started raining hard while he waited outdoors, and he got completely soaked rather than step under the covered porch. I asked if something happened the last time he was there. He said no. I asked why he wouldn't come inside, and he said he just couldn't anymore. When I pressed for a reason, he said, "I'd rather not discuss it." His behavior was affecting everything. We couldn't hang out with my roommate Anna, we couldn't use my pool. He suggested I move in with him, and when I said my lease wasn't up for 8 months, he offered to pay the penalty to break it. He'd already put a deposit on a new apartment without telling me. I had to figure out what was going on. Anna said nothing unusual happened that last Tuesday he visited. Parker had waited in the living room like always. She'd been in her room most of the time. When she came back downstairs, he was sitting on the couch normally. Nothing seemed wrong until I got home and he immediately wanted to leave. She said he'd actually left his phone on the coffee table in his rush to get out and she'd had to run after him to give it back. I checked our security cameras from that night. Parker arrived at 6:15 and Anna let him in at 6:16. There was a gap in the footage from 6:18 to 6:27. 9 minutes of black screen. He was sitting on the couch before and after looking exactly the same, but his wine glass was on the opposite side of the coffee table and his jacket was folded differently. My neighbor mentioned seeing Parker's car parked outside for hours last week while I was at work. When I asked Parker about it, he said yes, he'd been there. The neighbor said Parker had walked around the entire house multiple times taking photos with his phone and measuring the distance between windows. I started staying at his place every night. He'd drive me home in the mornings and wait in the car. His mother came to visit and asked to see my house. Parker told her I'd moved in with him permanently and my house had black mold. I'd never mentioned any mold, and when I corrected him, he gave me a look that stopped me cold. 3 weeks passed and nothing changed. Our relationship was perfect otherwise, but he'd started making bigger decisions. He'd called my landlord pretending to be me and tried to break my lease. He'd had my mail forwarded to his address. He was systematically removing any reason for me to go home. I threatened to break up with him if he didn't explain. He said he understood if I needed to do that, but he still couldn't tell me. He said, "I can't explain it in a way that would make sense to you." When I said to try anyway, he said, "You wouldn't believe me and it would make things worse for you." I asked if my house was dangerous. He said no. I asked if something bad would happen if he came inside. He said no. I asked if he was afraid. He said fear wasn't the right word. When I asked what the right word was, he thought for a long moment and said incompatible. Then Parker proposed, but said we'd have to sell my house first. When I said I wasn't selling, he withdrew the ring. He said he couldn't marry someone who lived there. I said I didn't live there anymore since I was always at his place. He said that wasn't enough. The house had to be sold to someone else. When I asked why, he said, because then it would be their problem. I demanded to know what happened during those 9 missing minutes of footage. He said nothing happened. I said something must have happened to make him act this way. He said, act what way? Like his behavior was completely normal. Then he said he'd been back to my house many times while I was at work. He'd been in the yard and on the porch and looked through all the windows. He'd spent hours studying it from every angle. He'd measured the exterior walls and compared them to the city's blueprints. There was an extra room that shouldn't exist. I asked why he kept coming back if he wouldn't go in. He said he was trying to understand something. When I asked what he said, why you can still live there. He said other people had lived there too and been fine, but that didn't mean it was actually fine. Later, I found a note in his handwriting that must have fallen from his pocket. It was a list of dates and times going back months before we'd met. Next to the last date was my address and a single word: confirmed. I stared at the note in my hands and felt my stomach drop. The dates went back 2 years, long before Parker and I met at that coffee shop 6 months ago. My fingers shook as I traced over his handwriting, seeing my address there with confirmed written next to it. He'd known about my house before he even knew me. I thought back to how we'd met, how he'd struck up that conversation about my book, how natural it all seemed. Now I wondered if any of it was real, or if he'd planned the whole thing. My mind raced through every conversation we'd had, every moment that felt genuine, every time he said he loved me. How much of our relationship was built on this secret knowledge he'd been carrying? I folded the note and put it in my pocket, my decision already forming. I was done being passive about this whole situation. Parker might refuse to tell me what was going on, but that didn't mean I couldn't find out for myself. I'd been letting him control everything, letting him make decisions about my life while I just went along with it. Not anymore. That evening when Parker picked me up from work, I sat in his car and turned to face him directly. "You need to stop making decisions about my housing without my consent," I said firmly. He looked surprised, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. "I understand," he said after a moment, nodding slowly. But I could see it in his eyes, that careful calculation, that planning look he got. He was already thinking of ways around this boundary I was setting. We drove to his apartment in silence and I watched him the whole time, studying his face for any sign of what he was really thinking. Late that night after Parker fell asleep, I opened my laptop in his living room and pulled up the security footage again. I went through frame by frame, writing down every single change I noticed after those 9 missing minutes. The wine glass had moved from the left side of the coffee table to the right. His jacket was folded differently, the sleeves tucked under instead of laid flat. And now I saw something I'd missed before. The throw pillow from the couch was on a completely different chair. Someone had been in that room during those 9 minutes, moving things around, and Parker had tried to put everything back, but hadn't gotten it quite right. I grabbed a notebook and started making a list of all the controlling things Parker had done recently. He'd called my landlord Catherine Durham pretending to be me. He'd forwarded my mail to his address without asking. He'd put deposits on apartments without telling me. He'd lied to his mother about black mold in my house. He'd hired movers instead of helping me himself. Seeing it all written out in black and white made my chest tight. This wasn't just strange behavior about my house. This was him systematically removing my independence piece by piece. By the end of that first day of really thinking about it, I'd made a decision. I needed to pursue 2 things at once. I needed to know what was wrong with my house, what that extra room was that shouldn't exist. And I needed to understand what Parker really knew about it, what his company did, why he had that list of addresses. The next morning while Parker was in the shower, I texted Anna from the bathroom with the fan running to cover the sound of my typing. Can you help me reconstruct every minute of Parker's last normal visit? I typed quickly. She responded immediately with YES in all caps, then started sending me timestamps from her phone. She'd heard him arrive at 6:14 because she remembered checking the time. She came downstairs at 6:25 to get water and he was on the couch. She went back up at 6:27 and stayed there until I got home at 6:45. Those timestamps lined up almost perfectly with the camera blackout from 6:18 to 6:27. While Parker made breakfast, I sat at his kitchen table with my notebook, writing down his exact words from our conversations. Incompatible was what he'd called himself and my house. Their problem was what he'd said about selling to someone else. Confirmed was on that note next to my address. The language felt clinical, like he was describing a medical condition, or a scientific observation rather than a house. It reminded me of how doctors talk about diseases, careful and specific and removed. After he left for work, I created a folder on my laptop called House Investigation, and started organizing everything. Screenshots of the security footage showing the changes, the timestamps from Anna, photos my neighbor Bud Casey had sent of Parker measuring my windows, the note I'd found with the dates and addresses. Having it all organized in one place made me feel like I was taking back some control over this insane situation. I saved multiple copies to different cloud services just in case. Looking at all the evidence laid out, I made another decision. I wouldn't confront Parker yet while I gathered more information. If he knew I was investigating on my own, he might try harder to get me out of the house or hide whatever else he knew. I needed to be smart about this. Strategic. The way he'd been strategic about slowly taking over my life. That evening after dinner, I pulled up my laptop and started digging into the router settings. I'd never looked at the system logs before, but there they were. Pages and pages of connection records and power events. I scrolled back to that Tuesday and found exactly what I was looking for at 6:18 p.m. The router had lost power for 9 minutes, coming back online at 6:27. The timestamp matched the camera blackout perfectly. Someone had deliberately cut power to the security system and the network, but left the rest of the house running. The next morning, I grabbed my tape measure from the garage and started mapping out every room in the house. I measured from wall to wall, writing down each number in my notebook. The kitchen was 12 feet by 14 feet. The bathroom was 6 by 8. When I got to the living room, something felt off. The exterior wall should have been 15 feet from the hallway, but my tape showed only 13 feet. I measured again to be sure. Still 13 feet. I went outside and measured the exterior of the house, then came back in and compared the numbers. The living room wall was definitely 2 feet thicker than it should be. That night, I drove to the hardware store and bought a pack of battery-powered motion sensors. Back home, I stuck them on every door and window, one by one. Each sensor had a little red light that blinked when it detected movement. I walked past each one to test it, noting the baseline readings in my notebook. If something was getting into my house through that hidden space, these sensors would tell me. The next morning during my drive to work, I pulled out my phone and hit record on the voice memo app while sitting in traffic. What would need to happen for me to stay with Parker? I asked myself out loud. He'd need to tell me the truth about what he knows. He'd need to stop trying to control where I live. He'd need to explain that list of addresses. Hearing my own voice say these things made them feel more real. I kept recording. What would make me leave him? If he keeps lying. If he won't stop this weird behavior. If he puts me in danger. The words hung in the air of my car. When Parker picked me up from work that evening, I noticed he'd parked even further away than usual. I counted the houses as I walked. 4 houses down now, not 3. I pulled out my notebook and wrote down the date and time while he watched me from the driver's seat. My irritation was building with each new avoidance. He used to wait in my driveway like a normal boyfriend. Now he acted like my house had some kind of force field around it. That night after he dropped me off, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and made a decision. Parker wasn't going to tell me what was going on, so I'd find answers myself. I'd check public records, contact experts, do whatever it took to understand what was wrong with my house. The next morning, I went to the city website and started downloading everything I could find about my property. Building permits from 1952 when the house was built. Renovation permits from 1978 and 1994. Property tax records showing every owner since the beginning. The documents were old and some were hard to read, but they showed every approved change to the house over the years. A new roof in 1978. Kitchen renovation in 1994. Nothing about any hidden rooms or observation spaces. I spread the papers across my dining table and started comparing the official square footage to my measurements from yesterday. The permit said the house was 1,850 square feet. But when I added up all my room measurements, including closets and hallways, I only got 1,750 square feet. There were almost 100 square feet of space in this house that didn't match any room I could access. That missing space had to be behind that thick living room wall. I opened my email and typed a message to the city building department, keeping my tone professional and calm. I'm a tenant at this address, and I've noticed some discrepancies between the official square footage and the actual interior dimensions. Could there be unpermitted modifications to the property? I'd appreciate any information you can provide. I hit send and tried to focus on my work for the rest of the morning. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, I had a response in my inbox from someone named Alistair Shaw at the building department. He wrote that unpermitted work could definitely explain the square footage difference I'd found. He said these kinds of modifications happen more often than people realized, especially in older houses. He offered to schedule an official inspection if I could get my landlord's approval. He even included his direct phone number and said to call if I had questions. I saved his email and added his contact information to my phone. Having an actual city official confirm that something might be wrong with my house made me feel less crazy. Parker kept insisting everything was fine while refusing to go inside. Now I had proof that the house had hidden space that shouldn't exist. I started drafting an email to my landlord Catherine about the inspection but stopped myself. I needed more evidence first. I needed to be strategic about this, just like Parker had been strategic about taking over my life. I pulled up the property records again and started highlighting every modification, every permit, every change to the structure. The paper trail would help me make my case. That evening when Parker texted that he was outside, I looked out the window and saw his car parked. So far down the street I could barely see it. I grabbed my notebook and walked the distance, counting my steps. 112 steps from my front door to his car, 4 houses and 2 driveways away. I walked back inside and grabbed the blueprints I'd printed from the city website. I spread them out on my dining table next to photos I'd taken of every room in my house. With a yellow highlighter, I started marking every place where something didn't match up. The living room wall was definitely 3 feet further in than the blueprint showed. The hallway to the bedrooms was narrower too. I took screenshots of the blueprint next to my photos and started making a presentation on my laptop. Each slide showed the official dimensions versus what actually existed. The visual comparison made it impossible to ignore that something was seriously wrong with this house. My phone buzzed with a text from Anna. She'd been going through her photos from that Tuesday night and found some she took of her dinner. In the background of one shot, I could see the living room and Parker sitting on the couch. The angle of the couch was different from it was in the security footage from after the blackout. She sent me 3 more photos, and in each one, small things had changed position. While I was saving Anna's photos, my neighbor Bud Casey texted me a picture. He'd taken it last week when he saw Parker outside my house with some weird device. Parker was pointing it at my windows, and the device had a small screen on it. Bud said it looked like one of those laser measuring tools contractors use, but fancier. I saved the photo with all the metadata intact. Parker had been measuring the exact distance between my windows for some reason. I picked up my phone and dialed Catherine Durham's number. When she answered, I kept my voice calm and professional. I told her about the square footage discrepancy and the potential unpermitted modifications. I didn't mention Parker or any of his strange behavior. I just focused on the building code issues and my concerns as a tenant. Catherine sounded annoyed and tried to brush me off. She said old houses often had measurement errors in the records. But when I mentioned I'd already contacted the city building department, her tone changed slightly. She agreed to come look at the house next week when she was in the area. Her casual attitude about potential code violations made my jaw clench. That evening when Parker picked me up, he asked again if I wanted to move in with him permanently. I told him I needed the truth about my house first. He went completely quiet and didn't argue or try to convince me. His silence felt heavier than any argument would have been. Back at his apartment, I waited until he fell asleep, then pulled out my laptop. I found Parker's dropped note in my bag and highlighted every date and address on it. Each one led to a residential property when I searched online. Several had been sold recently. One address from 2 years ago had a weird sales history with multiple quick turnovers. I kept digging and found an old forum post from 2019. Someone in a neighborhood 2 miles away had discovered a hidden observation space behind their living room wall. They described finding old wiring, brackets for equipment, and what looked like spaces where cameras or recording devices had been mounted. The description matched exactly what I suspected was behind my wall. The person said they'd lived there for 3 years before discovering it during a renovation. My hands were shaking as I read their description of feeling violated and watched. The next morning, while Parker showered, I called Owen Sandoval's contracting company. His receptionist said he specialized in finding structural problems and hidden damage. I scheduled a walkthrough for later that week. Having an actual expert look at my house would give me real evidence to show Catherine. Parker saw the appointment on our shared calendar when he checked his phone. He didn't say anything, but his whole body went still. He didn't protest or argue like he usually did. His silence told me he already knew exactly what Owen would find. I spent the rest of the morning organizing all my evidence into folders. The blueprints, the photos, the square footage calculations, Anna's pictures, Bud's photo of Parker measuring. Having everything documented made me feel like I was finally taking control of this situation. Parker had been investigating my house for months before we met. Now it was my turn to investigate. When I got to work, I couldn't focus on anything except the forum post I'd found. The person described how the hidden space had been professionally built with sound insulation and ventilation. Whoever created it had planned to watch the residents for extended periods. They'd found mounting brackets that suggested multiple cameras or recording devices. The space had its own electrical wiring that bypassed the main circuit breaker. That explained why someone could cut power to my security system without affecting the hidden space. By lunch, I'd found 3 more similar posts from different cities. Each one described finding observation spaces and rental properties. The stories were all slightly different but had the same basic elements: hidden rooms behind walls, evidence of surveillance equipment, landlords who claimed ignorance. One person said they'd found a small fan installed for ventilation, which explained the noise Anna had been hearing. That afternoon, Catherine called back to confirm she'd stop by next Tuesday. Her voice was tighter than before, and she asked several questions about what exactly I thought was wrong. I kept my answers vague and professional. I didn't want to give her time to cover anything up or prepare excuses. After she hung up, I texted Owen to confirm our appointment for Monday, the day before Catherine's visit. I wanted his professional assessment before dealing with my landlord. Parker texted that he was outside to pick me up. I looked out and saw his car parked even further away than yesterday. 5 houses down now. The distance kept growing, like he was physically pulling away from my house and trying to pull me with him. During dinner at his place, he barely spoke. When I mentioned Owen's visit, he just nodded and pushed food around his plate. Later that night, he held me tighter than usual while we slept, like he knew everything was about to change. The next morning, I woke up early and checked our shared calendar on my phone while Parker was still sleeping. I'd added Owen's appointment for Monday afternoon in big letters so I wouldn't forget. Parker rolled over and grabbed his phone to check the time, and I watched his face change when he saw the calendar notification. He didn't say anything at all, just stared at the screen for a long moment before putting the phone back down. Usually he'd protest or try to talk me out of anything related to my house, but this time he was completely silent. His lack of reaction told me more than any argument could have. He already knew what Owen was going to find. After Parker left for work, I opened my laptop and started typing an email to Alistair Shaw at the city building department. I asked him about the legal steps we'd need to take if Owen found unpermitted space during his inspection. Within an hour, Alistair wrote back with a detailed explanation of the remediation process. He explained everything in simple terms I could actually understand, listing out the forms we'd need and the timeline for getting permits approved. I saved his email in my evidence folder along with all the other documentation I'd been collecting. Monday came faster than I expected, and Owen arrived right on time at 2 o'clock. I met him at the front door and led him straight to the living room where I'd measured the wall thickness. He ran his hand along the wall and knocked in several places, listening carefully to each sound. Then he pulled out some kind of electronic device and held it against the wall, moving it slowly across the surface. The device started beeping when he reached the center section, and he nodded like he'd expected that. He explained that the wall was definitely thicker than standard construction, and the echo pattern suggested a hollow space behind it. My heart was pounding, so hard I could hear it in my ears. This was real confirmation from an actual expert, not just my amateur measurements and suspicions. Owen showed me how a small camera inspection would work, drilling a tiny hole that could easily be patched later. He said it was completely legal as long as we had the landlord's permission, and the camera would show us exactly what was behind that wall. For the first time in weeks, I felt actual hope that I'd finally get answers about what was wrong with my house. I called Catherine right there while Owen waited, putting her on speaker so he could hear too. She immediately started making excuses about liability concerns, and said her schedule was too busy for the next month. When I pressed her about the safety issues, she said she'd need to check with her insurance company first. Her reluctance made me wonder if she already knew what we'd find behind that wall. After Owen left, I found a voicemail from Parker that he'd left while I was at work last week. I must have missed it in all the chaos, but when I played it back, his words made my skin crawl. He said selling the house would just transfer the problem to someone else, and that wasn't right. The moral concern in his voice revealed he knew something serious about my house, something bad enough that he didn't want innocent people to suffer from it. The next day I had an appointment with Jocelyn Guzman, who specialized in helping people in controlling relationships. Parker had dropped me off at a coffee shop near her office, and I walked the rest of the way alone. Jocelyn was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with kind eyes and a calm voice that immediately put me at ease. She listened to my whole story without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she helped me recognize all the warning signs I'd been missing or explaining away. She pointed out how Parker had been systematically removing my independence, from forwarding my mail to trying to break my lease behind my back. We spent an hour creating a safety plan with concrete steps I could take to protect myself. Following Jocelyn's advice, I went straight to the post office and got my own P.O. box that Parker didn't know about. Then I sat in my car and changed every single password on my accounts, using combinations he'd never guess. I started a new document with timestamps for everything that happened, going back through my texts and emails to build a complete timeline. Taking these practical steps made me feel more in control than I had in weeks. That evening, Anna texted me while I was at Parker's place making dinner. She said she'd been hearing a weird fan noise behind the living room wall for weeks, but had assumed it was just the HVAC system acting up. She said it ran constantly, day and night, and sometimes she could hear it clicking on and off at regular intervals. The detail sent chills down my spine because it matched exactly what that forum post had described. Someone had installed ventilation in that hidden space, which meant it was designed for extended use. The next morning, I checked my email and found an official message from Alistair with an appointment window for an on-site inspection. He could come next Thursday afternoon with the city inspector to formally document any code violations. My nerves were completely shot from all the stress, but at least I had a concrete plan moving forward with actual officials who could force Catherine to open that wall. Parker picked me up that evening and drove to his apartment without saying much. Once we got inside, he sat on his couch and looked at me with that same calm expression. He told me again that it wasn't about being scared of my house. He said the word incompatible like it explained everything, like it was the most logical thing in the world. His calm insistence that this made perfect sense made my hands shake with frustration. I wanted to grab his shoulders and shake him until he told me what was really going on. Instead, I went to his kitchen and started pulling papers from my bag. I spread everything out on his counter and started organizing it into a clear timeline. I had screenshots of the security footage, Anna's texts about the noises, Bud's photos of Parker measuring my house. I put sticky notes on each piece with dates and times, creating a packet that any inspector could follow. My hands moved faster as I worked, putting everything in plastic sleeves and labeling each section. Working on something concrete helped me breathe normally again instead of screaming at Parker. Anna texted me while I was organizing the papers. She said she'd been thinking about that Tuesday night and remembered something else. She'd heard that same fan noise behind the living room wall that night too. But during those 9 minutes when the cameras went dark, the fan had stopped completely. Then it started up again right before the power came back on. My stomach turned as I read her message because it confirmed what I already suspected. Someone had been in that hidden space that night. Someone who turned off the ventilation while they were inside. I showed Parker the text and watched his face stay perfectly neutral. Later that night while we were eating takeout, I put down my fork and looked at him. I told him his marriage proposal was completely off the table until he explained what he knew. He nodded and said he understood, but he still couldn't tell me the truth. He accepted my boundary without any argument or emotion, which somehow made it worse. After dinner, I pulled out his dropped note again and studied it more carefully under the lamp. Some of the dates were from 2 years ago, way before we'd met at that coffee shop. My address was on there with dates going back 18 months before I'd even moved in. The sick feeling in my stomach got worse as I realized he might have known about me long before we randomly met. Had he targeted me specifically because of where I lived? The next morning, my phone buzzed with a video message from Bud. He'd been going through his security camera footage and found something from last week. The video showed Parker walking around my house with some kind of laser measuring device. He was pointing it at the roof overhangs and writing numbers in a notebook. He measured every single angle of the house, clearly calculating the exact dimensions of whatever was hidden inside. Parker had spent over an hour doing this while I was at work. I forwarded the video to my documentation folder and added it to my timeline packet. Catherine called me that afternoon while I was at work. Her tone had completely changed from dismissive to cooperative. She said she'd supervise the camera inspection personally if she could be there with the contractor. She wanted to make sure everything was done properly and any issues were documented correctly. Her sudden helpfulness made me wonder if Alistair had contacted her about the code violations. Maybe he'd explained the legal problems she'd face if she didn't cooperate with the inspection. 20 minutes later, I got an email chain that included Catherine, Owen, and Alistair. They were coordinating schedules for the inspection visit next week. Catherine suggested Tuesday afternoon, and Owen confirmed he could bring his camera equipment then. Alistair said he'd send an official inspector to document everything properly. Reading their professional emails about my house made me feel less crazy for the first time. These were real people taking this seriously, not just me being paranoid about Parker's behavior. That evening, I told Parker about the scheduled inspection while we were watching TV. His whole body went still when I mentioned it. He turned to look at me and said quietly that I shouldn't look behind that wall. He said it would change things in ways I couldn't understand yet. His resignation was clear in his voice, like he knew exactly what we'd find but couldn't stop it. He didn't try to convince me to cancel or argue about it. He just sat there looking defeated, which scared me more than if he'd gotten angry. Before bed, I checked my email one more time and found a message from Alistair. He explained that if we found unpermitted space in the house, Catherine would be legally required to fix it. I wouldn't be held responsible for any code violations since I was just a tenant. He said the city would issue official notices, and Catherine would have to bring everything up to code. Reading his reassurance helped my racing thoughts slow down enough to actually fall asleep. The inspection was really going to happen, and I'd finally get answers about what was behind that wall. Monday night, I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook and wrote down 3 simple plans for what I'd do after the inspection. If the problem was something we could fix, I'd stay and make Catherine pay for it. If it was actually dangerous, I'd move out right away. Either way, Parker and I were done. Writing it all down made my hands stop shaking for the first time in days. Tuesday afternoon came fast, and Owen showed up at 2 with a big plastic case full of equipment, while Catherine stood in the doorway looking nervous. He set up the snake camera thing and started feeding it through a tiny hole he drilled in the living room wall. Within 10 minutes, he found it. There was definitely empty space back there, about 3 feet deep and running the whole length of the wall. My stomach dropped, but I also felt relieved that I wasn't crazy. Owen kept moving the camera around, and the images on his little screen made me want to throw up. There were old electrical wires running everywhere, metal brackets mounted to the studs, and then he found the worst part. A big rectangular panel that looked exactly like a 2-way mirror, positioned right where it would face into my living room. I had to sit down because my legs went weak. Catherine started talking fast about how she had no idea this was here, and the previous owner must have done it without permits. She kept saying she'd never been told about any of this when she bought the place 5 years ago. Then she said we should open up the wall properly so we could see everything and she'd pay for it all. Her quick agreement made me think she was scared of getting sued. Alistair showed up an hour later with his clipboard and started taking photos of everything. He measured the wall thickness and checked his blueprints and wrote down a bunch of code violations. He gave Catherine an official notice that said she had 30 days to fix everything or face fines. For the first time since this whole thing started, I felt like someone with actual authority was on my side. That night at Parker's apartment, I sat with my laptop and finally understood what happened during those 9 missing minutes. Parker had killed the power to the router and cameras, so he could get into that hidden space without being recorded. He'd gone in there to check something, maybe to see if the observation equipment was still working, then he'd come back out and turned everything back on. Those 9 minutes changed how he saw my whole house. I couldn't stand it anymore, so I walked into the bedroom where he was reading and told him straight out what we'd found behind the wall. His face didn't change at all. Then he finally said it. He worked for a company that investigated houses with weird histories. They'd known about my place before I ever moved in. He'd been assigned to watch it, to watch me. He said they tracked properties where strange things had been reported, or where previous owners had done suspicious modifications. My house was on their list because of the hidden room. He explained in this calm voice that the house was incompatible with transparency, which made no sense until he kept talking. He said if I'd known about the observation space while living there, I could become legally liable for any privacy violations against guests. But if I sold it without knowing, that liability would transfer to the new owner. He'd been trying to protect me by keeping me ignorant while getting me to move out and sell. His twisted logic about helping me through lies made me so angry I couldn't speak. I walked out of the bedroom and started packing my stuff. I called the mail forwarding service and canceled the redirect he'd set up. I removed him from my streaming accounts and changed all my passwords. I blocked his number on my phone. No big fight, no dramatic scene, just done. The relief I felt while driving away told me this was absolutely the right choice. The next morning I went to the police station and filed a report about the privacy violations and building code issues. The officer at the desk took it seriously and gave me an incident number for my records. She said a detective might contact me if they needed more information about the hidden room. 2 days later, Catherine called me back, sounding much more serious, and said she'd meet with Owen to discuss the remediation contract. I drove to the house and found Owen's truck already parked outside with Catherine's car behind it. They were standing in the living room looking at the open section of wall where Owen had cut a larger inspection hole. Catherine signed the paperwork right there on the kitchen counter and handed me a check for half the rent plus $800 for a hotel while they fixed everything. Owen said his crew could start Monday, and it would take about 2 weeks to remove all the old wiring and brackets and properly seal the wall. I went back to Parker's old apartment where I'd been staying since the breakup to pack my things, and found Anna already boxing up her stuff too. She said she couldn't stand being in that house knowing someone had been watching us through the wall. We spent the afternoon looking at apartments online and found a 2-bedroom place closer to downtown that was smaller but had good reviews and no weird history. The landlord could show it to us that evening, so we drove over together. The apartment was on the 3rd floor with lots of windows, and Anna immediately said it felt safer than the house. We filled out applications right there, and the landlord approved us within an hour since we had good credit and steady jobs. Catherine texted that she'd waive the lease break fee completely given the circumstances, and would have our security deposits ready by Friday. 2 weeks went by while Owen's crew worked on the house. Alistair came back to inspect the finished work, and walked through with his clipboard checking everything. He confirmed all the observation equipment had been removed, and proper permits were now filed for the wall repairs. The house was officially just a regular house again with no hidden spaces or weird modifications. He gave Catherine the final inspection report and told her she could rent it out again once she disclosed the previous issues to future tenants. I had my follow-up appointment with Jocelyn at her office downtown, where we talked for an hour about recognizing control patterns in relationships. She helped me see how Parker had slowly been taking away my choices, while making it seem like he was protecting me. We made a list of boundaries I wanted to set in future relationships, and warning signs to watch for. She said trusting my instincts was the most important thing, and that I'd already shown I could stand up for myself by ending things with Parker. A few days later, I found a box of my things on the doorstep of the new apartment with a note from Parker saying he'd gathered everything I'd left at his place. The note also mentioned he'd started counseling through his work's employee assistance program to deal with his boundary issues. Part of me felt bad for him, but I didn't respond and just brought the box inside. Anna helped me go through it to make sure everything was there. Bud stopped by the old house while I was picking up the last of our mail and told me there had been way fewer strange cars driving slowly through the neighborhood since word got out about the investigation. He said the neighborhood watch group had started a shared document with home security tips and recommendations for contractors who could check for hidden spaces. The whole street was being more careful now and looking out for each other better than before. People were actually talking to their neighbors and sharing information instead of just keeping to themselves. I spent the next morning packing my last box of kitchen stuff from the old house while the remediation crew finished their final cleanup. Looking around the empty rooms, I thought about how I'd chosen to dig for the truth instead of accepting Parker's convenient lies about protecting me. It had cost me a relationship I thought was perfect but gave me back control over my own life. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for months was finally gone. A month passed in the new apartment and everything felt different in the best way. Anna and I had settled into a good routine, and I was actually sleeping through the night without waking up anxious. The apartment might be smaller, but it felt like ours, and nobody had ever hidden cameras in the walls or measured the windows with laser devices. I decided to write everything down and post it online as a warning to others about trusting their gut when something feels wrong. Parker's behavior had seemed caring at first, but it was really about control and keeping secrets that affected my safety. If someone refuses to explain their actions and tries to make major life decisions for you, that's not protection. It's manipulation. The response to my post was bigger than I expected, with hundreds of people sharing their own stories about partners who'd hidden important information or tried to control their living situations. Some had discovered their houses had problems their partners knew about. Others had partners who'd made up elaborate lies to isolate them. Reading all those stories made me realize how common this kind of thing was, and how important it was to share these experiences so others could recognize the signs earlier than I did. That's today's wrap-up. I always hope these give you something practical to think about, not just a story. If even one part stuck with you, it was worth it. Subscribe so the next one finds you right away.